Understanding the current conflict of political, cultural, and social views. From a biblical perspective. By Danzel Monk Sr. In 1 Chronicles 12, verse 32, there is a reference to the children of Issachar, which were men that had understanding of the times, to know what Israel ought to do. There is a great need for this kind of Christian today. People of God who understand what is going on in our society and what our roles as Christians are. In Matthew 16 verses 2 and 3, Jesus rebuked his audience for not being able to understand the times, quote, "He answered and said unto them, When it is evening, ye say, it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, it will be foul weather today, for the sky is red and lowering. O ye hypocrites, ye can discern the face of the sky, but can ye not discern the signs of the times?" Unquote. The Apostle Paul, speaking to the church at Rome in Romans chapter 13 verse 11, states, quote, "And that, knowing the time, that now it is high time to awake out of sleep, for now is our salvation nearer than when we believed." Unquote. Paul also admonished the believers in Thessalonica not to be guilty of sleeping when they should be awake and alert about what is going on around them. Quote, "Therefore let us not sleep, as do others, but let us watch and be sober. For they that sleep sleep in the night, and they that be drunken are drunken in the night. But let us, who are of the day, be sober." Unquote. 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verses 6 through 8. In our society today, there is a conflict that is eating away at the very stability of our way of life. The conflict is not about politics or culture, though it does influence both. And because of this, it is being displayed as a political, social, cultural matter in the political, social, and cultural media arena these days. The conflict is really about worldviews. It is a battle over truth and right versus evil and wrong. It is about the lies and deceptions of ungodly people, and the desire to control the thinking of the masses. Unless people understand this, they will continue to be pawns under the control of people who seek to dominate their thinking and their actions. And this is evident in the common falling out with each other that is occurring between family and friends. People are sadly being so infected with this toxic cancel culture mentality, that we need to step back, and take a look at how we can avoid being a part of the problem, and become a part of the solution. To do that, we have to know how to properly deal with family and friends who hold different views from us. Dealing with friends and family who hold different views from you. When dealing with friends and family who hold different views from you on politics, social and cultural matters, it is important to first maintain an attitude of respect and patience. Second, you need to know how to determine if they are sincere in their views or intentionally seeking to mislead, or just defend their bad views. To some today, even this thought is offensive. In their minds, to question anyone's sincerity is politically incorrect. But that conclusion is irrational, since being sure of someone's sincerity is necessary to avoid wasting your time. Important things to know about getting to the truth. It is important that we understand what we should do if we are going to effectively deal with disagreement with others on important issues. What we must first do is 1. Make sure that you have done your own homework, that you have sufficiently researched the matter by using reliable sources to make your determinations, and that you understand what you are talking about. People who fail to do this, only add to the problem and confusion. 2. Make sure that you have reliable supporting evidence for what you are defending and claiming. Don't just assume that your source is reliable because it is popular, or comes from a major media source. First, establish your source's level of credibility or conflict of interest. Then use your source, or not, with that knowledge in mind. 3. Be courteous when communicating, allow your opponent to complete their thought, and insist that they give you the same respectful treatment that you give them. If they refuse to do so, you must politely exit the conversation to avoid wasting your time with someone who is not interested in getting at the truth. Some people only want agreement, not truth. 4. Make sure that you are clear and brief in your points. Be straight to the point and do not overstate your point. And try not to complicate the message with unnecessary terms and big words. 5. Pay careful attention to how they respond to the points that you make, and reply to what they actually say, and not to what you think they were trying to say. This will put the blame on them if any confusion arises. 6. Always acknowledge when they have made a correct point. This demonstrates that you are not closed-minded. Being unwilling to acknowledge an actual good point is pride, and counterproductive to any discussion. 7. I recommend that you record your conversation for future reference, since you do not want to be without proof, should they decide to lie about your conversation. If you are having an online dialogue, keep a copy of the transcript. Some people tend to embellish or outright lie about what was said by whom. 8. Finally, keep in mind that your goal is to win them, not offend them. While offense may not be possible to avoid if they are unreasonable, you must still do your best not to intentionally offend. You are not responsible for their irrational thinking. The current climate of conflict. The current climate of conflict between different groups of people that disagree on political, social, and cultural views, has morphed into what amounts to what seems to be a civil war of ideas. This has developed with the help of the left media, and even some on the right, big tech, particularly but not only, Yahoo, Google, Facebook, and Twitter. All of whom are constantly publishing crafty narratives that promote their devious agendas rather than presenting the truth. Their material is influence-driven, rather than truth-driven. And yet, most people, including far too many Christians and pastors, don't seem to understand this fact. They foolishly digest what they see and hear, and they not only accept it, but they repeat it, and God help us, they even defend it, and become offended with those who fail to agree with their false conclusions. While the differing of ideas about politics, culture, and social issues is nothing new, and while the influence of the left has been dominant in our education system, Hollywood, the TV and cable networks, social media, and in our government for many years, thanks in part to a weak, apathetic, uninformed or compromised church, and certainly has played a role in the way that far too many Americans think about politics, our American Constitution, God, the Bible, Christianity, abortion, homosexuality, and now even basic facts about reality. The tragedy is that a big part of this war of ideas is being carried on by people who profess to be Christians. And yet the conduct of many of these Christians, as they engage in this war of ideas, has become clearly anything but Christian. The level of venom, the disrespect, the hatred of correction, and the level of sheer stubbornness, is astonishing. Family and friends who claim to be Christians are parting company over disagreements, and one, or in some cases both sides, are blaming the other for the canceling of their relationships. But worse, many are happy to take the blame for being the one who decided that they will no longer talk to another person who had the nerve to refuse to accept their viewpoints about politics, culture, or history, and or their views about what constitutes good Christian behavior and duty, when it comes to how to apply Christian truth and political ideas. In fact, they seem proud of their decision to cut off their family and friends. Christians seem to forget that God warned us of the deception many would face in the last days. 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 13 says, "But evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse, deceiving and being deceived." This has been demonstrated by the manner that the media is being, and has been, used in our nation for many years. Why people professing to be Christians are so gullible to intellectual manipulation, is due to intellectual laziness on their part, loving the ease of being told what to believe, and the failure in most cases of their chosen ministry under which they serve, to teach them biblical principles of learning how to discern truth. Pastors these days are more concerned about their public popularity and business connections, than they are about teaching the people God has assigned them to give them an understanding of His Word, and the ability to protect themselves from deception. Yes, even pastors have made the left media their teachers, and they themselves have become not only victims of misinformation, but also the disseminators of that misinformation to others. And this is sin. You may ask, how did we get here? In 2 Timothy chapter 2 verse 2, Paul says to Timothy, "You therefore, my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. And the things that you have heard of me among many witnesses, you commit the same to faithful men, who shall be able to teach others also." Perhaps this is not being done sufficiently as it should today. We got here by godly people being careless. Godly people failed to sufficiently teach those who came after them to always be on guard against crafty deceivers, wolves in sheep clothing. An important teaching of Jesus. Matthew 7 verse 15. They failed to consistently and sufficiently maintain as part of their religious teaching and training the wiles of the devil, and how his servants use deceit, subtlety, and craftiness to influence people to believe lies, and to willingly sin against God. And so they allowed the ungodly through deception, subtlety, and craftiness, to gradually take over important institutions in our nation that had the ability to influence large numbers of people at a time. Education, Hollywood, and the makeup and fashion industry, the TV networks, and even our political parties. They targeted the two last remaining enemies against their ungodly desires: the medical institutions and the church. The wolves crept in and took over the APA and other psychological institutions that for so long had correctly taught that homosexuality was a mental disorder. And they did it not by scientific evidence, but by physical harassment. They targeted their meetings, they targeted key representatives, and they targeted media and TV networks to make sure that everyone knew that if you disagree with us, we will make you pay, we will make you suffer. And we failed to respond with sufficient political, cultural, social, intellectual, and spiritual moral force to deal properly with their hostile tactics, and that made them bolder, and they became even more aggressive. And godly people became more passive, and refused to take action to stop the aggressions of the ungodly. And the ungodly got control of the judiciary and law, and began using them against the godly to silence them. The Roe v. Wade decision that led to legalized murder of the unborn in our nation, is only one example of the result of good people losing to bad people. You see, when godly people forget what God said, and began to allow the ungodly to teach them, they eventually accept what the ungodly says God said, rather than what God actually said. And so, biblical love, which is based on truth, is replaced by secular love, which is based on sinful feelings and desires. The rational gives way to irrationality, and logic is replaced by fantasy, as the foundation for ideas and laws. This is how our world eventually ends up with dictatorships and world wars. Sadly, Christians have been trained to want things to be simple, easy, and conflict-free, and they don't want to have to take a stand for anything that requires a fight. But the evil, ungodly, and wicked have no problem with any of that, and that is why they eventually end up in control. It is only after such control for a time, that the godly get fed up and tired of being dominated by the wicked, and they become willing to fight. But this time it may be too late. We are in the last days, and this information war may well lead to tribulation for the righteous. But even if that is the case, we are not permitted by God to stop fighting for truth. We are commanded to stay engaged in the work until Jesus returns, Luke chapter 19 verse 13, and to keep fighting the good fight of faith. 1 Timothy chapter 6 verse 12. In an article that I wrote some years ago, I stated the following, quote, "When Jesus said in John chapter 3 verse 11, Verily, verily, I say unto thee, we speak that we do know, and testify that we have seen," and when Paul instructed Timothy to study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needs not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth, 2 Timothy 2 verse 15, they were laying down a standard for believers to be accountable for those they allowed to teach them and from whom they accepted information. They also were making it clear that we were accountable for what we say. This should make us as believers very careful not to just repeat ideas and words or hold view or take sides without having at least done a reasonable amount of investigation to try to make sure we are on the right side of an issue, and are speaking from a reasonable point of understanding as a result. Just repeating what we hear is a good way to end up guilty of helping to spread false information. Our Christian faith requires that we be more honest and dedicated to truth than others who do not have a relationship with God. It is our obligation as Christians to carefully check any and all information that we are exposed to confirm its credibility before believing or repeating. Not only information from the media, the left, right or conservative source, but also any ministry information that we are exposed to. We must dedicate ourselves to defending truth and not parties, people, or platforms. That is our Christian obligation. Unquote. So the question is, what are you doing to make sure that you are operating in the best manner that you can, as a Christian? And that you are in fact, functioning as a biblical Christian, and are a part of the solution rather than a contributor to the problems? This is a serious question. May God help us to be examples of the believer.